Hey guys, welcome in. The 3 weeks of group matches are over for stage 3, and that means the third major is upon us. In this video, I want to go ahead and look through the winners bracket and the losers bracket and predict all of this all the way till the final, and we'll see what ends up happening. I think throughout the entirety of stage 3, there was a lot of parity, a lot of things that people didn't expect to happen. So I'd imagine the Major 3 tournament is going to be just the same, but without further ado, let's go ahead. Let's bring up our bracket, and as you can see here, you have the winners bracket on top, you have the losers bracket underneath, and eventually you're just going to make your way through, and we'll see who ends up winning this thing. But I think the way that we'll do this is we'll go day by day. We'll start with the losers bracket, then we'll move up to the winners bracket, and we'll just continue to go throughout from there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start with elimination bracket round 1. You have LAG versus the Seattle Surge, and when it comes to this one, I think that this is probably the story of two different squads here. To me, it seems like, especially since adding Decimate, and even before that, really, Seattle has been a lot more competitive than they were prior in the season, especially during stage 1. They came on a bit as of stage 2. Throughout stage 3, it looked like they were just missing a little bit of presence from the SMG position, and I think that Decimate is bringing that to that squad. When it comes to LAG, they did have a bit of success right as Chino was added to the lineup, but as the third stage went on, they weren't quite able to continue that throughout the entirety of stage 3. So right now, I just feel like Seattle is a little bit ahead of where LAG is at. I think Decimate is going to bring exactly what that squad needs. Now, things could change. We'll see end up happening here, but we're going to go ahead. We're going to take Seattle, and we're going to move them into losers bracket round 2. Which brings us to the second matchup of round 1, which is the London Royal Ravens versus the Paris Legion. And I think, honestly, this is absolutely a tale of two different squads. When you look at where London is at right now, they are playing essentially every single team that they have played throughout the entirety of stage 3. It was really tight. Even against some of those tougher competition in their group, they were right in a lot of those matches, and that you really can't say the same exact thing from Paris. It just doesn't seem to be working. It doesn't seem to be clicking. So when I look at London overall, I think all of the chemistry that Zaptius and Paul X bring in from their time in AMS when they were on Wester, you couple that with Shawnee that really just needed some SMGs to take the presence off of him. I think that London is much better than where they were earlier, which is why I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move London ahead, which will set up a matchup with the Minnesota Rocker. Now, from here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to peek up at the winners bracket. And I think at the start of Major 3, I bet a lot of people wouldn't have expected these squads to be the squads that are in winners bracket. But winners round 1, you have Atlanta FaZe and the Dallas Empire. And right now, I think Dallas did have a pretty impressive victory against Minnesota Rocker. But in that Rocker match, they had to rely on like a 12 streak in the map 1 Moscow hardpoint from Illy in order to get that victory. And I just don't see that happening over and over again. Whereas Atlanta is just coming off of a completely dominant matchup against Optic Chicago. Right now, I think Atlanta is a super good squad, which is going to set up a rematch right off the bat of the stage 2 major final, the grand finals, Toronto versus Atlanta. I am super excited for that one. And the next match is Florida versus LA Thieves. So LA Thieves did end up getting into the winners bracket despite the fact they lost their last stage 3 matchup. And when I look at these two squads, of course, you have Huke coming onto the scene for the LA Thieves, but when you think of Florida, the way that they've been able to get their victories is from the dominant performances that they've gotten out of Awakening and Skies, and I think anybody that plays them is going to have to match what they bring to the table. Now, it just so happens that LA Thieves can do that, right? When you have Kenny and you have Draza, they've both been playing super well. I think that they can go toe-to-toe with Awakening and Skies, and oh, by the way, Now you have Huke to match up with those SMGs. So in this one, I like what LA Thieves brings to the table. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move them out. Now, we'll see what ends up happening. I think that this is going to be a super tight matchup. I think this might be the tightest matchup that we'll see kind of on these opening days here. But I really like what's going on from LA Thieves. Now, when they play New York, I think anything can happen, but we'll get to that in a moment. Now, as we move forward here, we have to take the winners from the winners round 1, and we have to move them down. So we're going to take Dallas and move them down here to round 3. We are also going to take Florida and move them into the losers round 3. And once we're here, now we can go ahead and take a peek at those elimination round 2 matchups. You have Seattle versus Optic. I think this one will probably be closer than a lot of people expect it to be, just because Optic has not looked great as of late, especially in their final matchup against Atlanta. Now, most people don't end up looking very great against Atlanta, but it's just not the same Optic squad that I think a lot of people were thinking we were going to get, especially when you get this far into the season. But that does tend to be the story with Optic, is they come out right out the gates. They're one of the best squads, and then everybody catches up to them, and we'll see if they can move forward from that. But Seattle, I think they're getting better. I don't know if they're getting this better. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to move Optic ahead, which will set up a matchup with the Dallas Empire, and that one will be a joy to watch if that's how it ends up shaking out. Losers bracket round 2, we have the London Royal Ravens versus the Minnesota Rocker, and I don't know why, but I am super high on the Minnesota Rocker right now. I think that the way that they are playing, yes, they did end up losing that featured matchup on Sunday of the Dallas home series, but Standy has looked fantastic. I think they might need a little bit more from accuracy out of the man AR position, but other than that, Attach is playing great. Priesthood just went 17-4 in a Miami S&D. Does seem like they're finding their stride. Had it not been for one spree out of Illy, they would have been the team in the winners bracket. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move Minnesota ahead. I think that they're a squad to be reckoned with, and we can absolutely potentially see them on a championship Sunday. We'll see how it all ends up shaking out. But moving back up to the winners bracket round 2, we have Toronto versus Atlanta. And this one, to me, you could flip a coin. I got to tell you, I'm not entirely sure how this one is going to shake out. You have to respect the fact that Toronto ended the stage 3 group play with a record of 5-0. That is unbelievably impressive, especially with some of the teams that were in their group, most notably Dallas Empire and Minnesota, and they just made quick work of everybody, and a lot of those maps weren't even close. So Toronto has looked fantastic, but Atlanta has gotten some unbelievably impressive wins, especially that 3-0 against Optic Chicago. And I just feel like at this point in time, these are the top 2 teams in the game without a doubt. But if I have to pick a team to move ahead, even though Toronto has, without a doubt, since Championship Sunday of the Stage 2 Major, been the best squad in the CDL, I just have so much faith in the Atlanta FaZe. And I just feel like in a high pressure scenario, they're not going to end up choking the same way that they did earlier on. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to move Atlanta through. If you think Toronto is going to be here, 1,000%, I could see that happening. For me, I just don't see it working out that way, which is going to take Toronto and move them down into the losers bracket. And from here, they'll play the winner of Florida versus Minnesota, which we will talk about in a second. But before that, we have to get our other team, which will be in the winners final. And that's between the New York Subliners and the LA Thieves. Now, these are 2 squads that are building chemistry. They're both newly formed roster. When you're taking a look at the New York Subliners, of course, the first thing that you think about is Hydra. And before the last group match, Hydra was one of the best players in Hardpoint, whether it came to engagements per 10 minutes or kills per 10 minutes or any of those stats in Hardpoint. He was absolutely unbelievable. But in S&D and in Control, he was one of the worst. He was one of the worst SMGs that there was. Now, I will say, they haven't had a ton of time to work through things, and I think that's what they're doing currently, because towards the later portion of the stage 3 groups, he looked much, much better. So that's to be reckoned with. I think that they are a really good squad and a really dangerous squad. Again, we did talk about LA Thieves with what they bring to the table from their flex and their main AR with Kenny and Draza. Now you add Hugh. I just wonder if they've had enough time to really gel at this point in time. But you could say the same thing for New York. So for this one, I think this one is a coin flip. The only thing that makes me think that New York will be victorious here is just how good they've been playing as of late. They've been absolutely on fire, and that has to mean something. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to move New York ahead, and that takes LA Thieves, and that's going to move them down into the elimination round 4. So as we look at this one, they're going to play the winner of Dallas and Chicago, and this one is super tough because Dallas, while they've been looking better towards the end of stage 3 groups, there was a point in time towards the beginning where they were not firing on all cylinders. But what I will say is that I think that their struggles might have been towards the beginning of when Fellow came into the roster, because after that, they have absolutely been on fire. So if we're thinking about Dallas versus Optic, slowly but surely, Fellow has been contributing more and more to that squad. Whereas if you look at Optic, I'm not sure where you look at for the bright spots. When you look at that matchup they had against Atlanta, Envoy played extremely bad. Scum did not play great. You just didn't get the same performances out of Chicago, which leads me to believe that Dallas is the more polished squad right now. I think Chicago is in a little bit of a free fall, and they need something to gain their momentum back. They just don't seem like they're having fun right now. They don't look like they're clicking on all cylinders. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put Dallas through. This is one where down in the comments below, let me know how you feel about this one, because this could go either way. I just feel like Dallas is playing a bit better right now, which brings us to Florida versus Minnesota. And if you remember this matchup from previously in the stage 3 groups, this was a 3-1 victory out of Florida, and it did not really look all that close at all. I will say Priesta matched up really well against Awakening, and Standy was probably the best SMG in the lobby. But other than that, this previous matchup was entirely taken control of by Skies and Awakening. I'm not sure if it's going to be the same story here, but I think that these are two squads that are playing a bit better, and it could potentially be a toss-up here. So because of that, I just feel like what Skies brings to the table versus what Accuracy brings to the table, I feel like they have, and I'm not saying like overall, I'm just saying how those two are playing right now. I feel like the advantage goes to Florida when it comes to their main AR. But at the SMG position, I don't think you can argue whatsoever that Minnesota's SMGs in Attach and Standy have been playing super well. Havoc has been getting better. He came on and it just didn't work right off the bat. But slowly but surely, they're getting back into it. So this is a case of, will Priesta be able to match what Awakening brings to the table? And will Minnesota's SMGs be able to take over? And with that, I'm going to give Minnesota the nod here. This is another one which, if Florida comes through and wins this, I will not be shocked at all. I would say, okay, Skies took over and they got a good match out of Neptune and Havoc, but we'll see what happens. I think it's a coin flip, which brings us to losers bracket round 4. So we're going to predict the round 4 losers bracket, which will take us to round 5, and then we'll move on from there. So we have LA Thieves versus Dallas, and this basically for me comes down to, is Fellow at this point in time, I mean, now you'll think about it, he'll have another match against Atlanta, another match against Optic Chicago, so there'll be 2 more matches for him to get comfortable. Whereas if you're looking at the LA Thieves, this is a case where maybe their strats, especially with Venom coming on the scene, Venom is pretty new. We're not even talking about that because they did have the addition of Hook, but Venom is also pretty new. So when you're looking at this squad, there's a lot of chemistry and composure and team morale, and all that stuff is still, all of those intangible things are still being formed. So when I look at this squad, it just seems like right now Dallas might be performing a bit better, which is kind of odd because a couple weeks ago I was like, what the heck's going on with Dallas? They dropped Hugh. They're not playing well since they've added Fellow, but slowly but surely they're kind of returning to that Dallas form. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put Dallas through here. Again, LA Thieves, they could 1,000% end up winning this matchup, and it would not shock me at all, none whatsoever. But I just feel like they'll probably need a bit more time. If this was stage 4, now it might be a different story. But we'll go with Dallas here, which brings us to Minnesota versus Toronto. And outside of Atlanta, I'm not sure how many people at all can beat Toronto just because they've been playing so well. What they get from Kleenex, he has the ability to match the pressure and the aggression from any SMG outside of maybe a BZ, but Kleenex has been playing phenomenal. Cammy, and don't even get me started on on Insight, because Insight has been the best main AR in the league since he has come into the league. I know that as soon as they made that roster change, everybody was like, well, Methods is playing well. It's not like he's costing them wins, but they bring in Insight, and now all of a sudden he's the best in S&D, the best in Hardpoint. This kid statistically throughout Major 3 is the best player at the main AR position in the game, and it makes no sense whatsoever. I think a lot of their success is going to come down to what can they get out of Bance. We saw during the Stage 2 Major when Bance was on fire, that's when they really took off and they went through that run and they were able to beat Atlanta in the grand finals. But I don't know if you'll get the same performance out of Bance. I mean, that was some pretty high level stuff. I do think that you'll get enough to get through this round, even though Minnesota is playing really well. I think that Minnesota is not a squad that you want to mess with right now. I think slowly but surely, Standy is finding his place. I just think they need a little bit more out of accuracy. And if and when that happens, now all of a sudden they're a top 4 squad. I think they're probably top 5-ish, top 6 maybe as it stands right now. But there's definitely room for them to improve. But for right now, Toronto looks more polished, which brings us to, let's do the losers round 5 first, Dallas versus Toronto. And for all those reasons that I just said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move Toronto through. Again, I think Dallas is getting way better than they were before. I'm a little bit surprised that they've been able to get so much better in such a short amount of time. But this is Toronto, which without a doubt, I know I picked Toronto to lose to Atlanta, but Toronto is the hottest team in the game. You can't even question it. I just feel like in this moment, with what Atlanta did to Optic and how they're going to be feeling, I just felt like they were going to win that matchup versus Toronto. But without a doubt, I think Dallas is getting better, and it shocks me that they're returning to their previous form. But for right now, we're going to put Toronto through. Maybe things will change when it goes to stage 5, but we'll have to wait, or to stage 4, but we'll have to wait and see. Which brings us to our winners bracket finals, Atlanta versus New York. Now, this is one of those matchups where the last time these two teams faced off, New York absolutely looked like the better squad, but there's always a part of me that thinks, like, did Atlanta just have a bad day, or were they not motivated, or I don't know. I have so much faith in Atlanta and what they bring from every position. There's no doubt about it. I don't want to take anything away from the victory that New York had in their first matchup. They absolutely were the better squad on that day. I just don't know if they can do it repeatedly, whereas we've seen from Atlanta that they can. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the FaZe into our winners bracket final. Now, again, if New York gets there, it will not shock me at all, but I just feel like right now Atlanta is playing so well. Sure, New York is playing great, but I just don't know if match in, match out, you can get that same performance out of a player like Asim. This is Hydra's first time in a winner's bracket final if they make it there. So how is he going to react to that? And by the way, when we get to stage 4, this is going to be on LAN in person, and that might be all the difference. But when we go down to the elimination final, we have New York versus Toronto. And again, when I look at these squads, I just feel like overall what you get from Insight. I think Insight versus Clay is a super close matchup, but when you just look at the stats and you look at the engagements per 10 minutes and the first blood percentage and the control kills per 10 minutes, it's just everything Insight does, he is leading or in second place when it comes to all the main ARs in this stage 3 major. He's just been on a completely different level that we have not seen so far this year. So Clay is fantastic. I would take Clay. If I was starting a team right now, I would take Clay in a heartbeat, but he's just not playing at the same performance that Insight is. And the same can be said for Cammy. Cammy has looked unbelievable from that flex position. He has single-handedly taken over maps, even in that matchup against Minnesota, which we've talked about a couple times. Cammy has won maps basically purely by himself, which is going to set up I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put him through. I think New York is a surprise squad. I think after they made the roster change, I'm not sure everybody really expected them to be there. But as we look at this, this brings up a major 3 rematch final, and I wasn't even really sure that I was going to select these two teams again. It's just how I'm feeling, and it's just how it's shaking out. So we have Atlanta versus Toronto again, and like I said earlier, the winner of this one, to me, is going to solely come down to, are you going to get the same performance out of Bance? Because before they went on that roll during the stage 2 major tournament, there were tweets that he sent out where, you know, he screen capped a message that he sent his girlfriend and was like, I don't even know if I'm going to continue to play. He was not having the best stage. He has recovered, but there are maps where he plays okay and he plays lights out. And I think you know what you're going to get from Cammy and Kleenex and Insight at this point in time. Which Bance are you going to get? That's the biggest question for me. Are you going to get a Bance that is better than Simp and Abizi, or is that something that you would vote against? So that's the biggest question mark for me, and that's what it all comes down to. So because of that, this is going to be the 3rd major in a row where I go ahead and I'm going to pick Atlanta to win this thing. And I know it's not like going out on a limb, or maybe it is because Toronto has been playing so well, but I just feel like they're going to learn from the previous loss that they had. And if they didn't prove it in that last matchup against Optic Chicago that they are ticked off, they're ready to battle, they've come back focused, and they just look unbelievable. I mean, if they didn't prove that they're ready to go in that match against Optic, then I don't really know what happened. But we'll see. I think it'll be interesting to see if Toronto can make it all the way through. Maybe New York surprises some people. Heck, maybe LA Thieves ends up beating New York Subliners in that winners round 2, and then who knows what kind of run they could go on. So as you look at the bracket here from start to finish, down in the comments below, let me know, do you agree? Do you disagree? What matches might you have different than what I do? Do you think New York will go on a run? Heck, do you think Florida will go on a run? I mean, we talked through so many scenarios. There's a ton of stuff that can happen, and if we've learned anything from the stage 1 and the stage 2 major, we've learned that anything can happen on any given day, and there's not really anything that should surprise us. In fact, it just came to my mind when you think back to the stage 2 major, New York went 0-2 and they were out. So who knows what can happen, a stage-to-stage basis, a major-to-major basis. There are teams that take off and there are teams that underperform. So down in the comments, let me know what I got wrong. Thank you guys so much for checking out another episode. If you don't mind, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're new around here, leave a like, as it really helps out the channel. And starting Wednesday, we'll get these matches. So we will see you in our next upload.